Today we are going to look at some of the very important conditions of contract which allow us to manage the contract, regulate construction on site, and generally ensure that the contract is executed properly between the owner and the contractor. Remember, I had said that there is something called as an appendix, which is part of the contract document. And this appendix refers to some of the important clauses of the articles of agreement or the conditions of contract. And these are the different clauses that help us to regulate the way construction happens on site and the contract is executed. So we will look at it today. The first clause talks about the date of commencement and the date of completion. Now let's try and understand that the contract has to be completed or the construction has to be done in a specific period of time. If it takes more time, then it will become detrimental to the interests of the client. Because try and understand that the client also has to prepare for using the building after it is completed. For instance, if it is a hospital, then the client will have to order for equipment, for furniture, appoint doctors, etc., the other paramedical staff to ensure that the hospital starts functioning as quickly as possible and he starts getting returns on his investment as quickly as possible. So he must know the date by which the construction will be completed. And therefore, this date of commencement, or when does the contractor start construction and when does he complete the construction, have to be clearly mentioned in the contract. These are binding. These are binding conditions for both the contractor as well as the owner. Now you may say, why the owner? Because the owner has to also pay the contractor for the work that he does. Sometimes there's a clause inserted here which says time is the essence of the contract. What it means is that completing the work on time is one of the prime conditions of this contract. Okay. Then there is this whole question, why should we give the date of commencement? Because many times the day on which the contract is signed is not the day on which the contractor can start work. He will have to mobilize his resources in terms of workmen, labor, equipment required, purchase some material or place order for materials. All this requires a bit of time. So usually the date of commencement is a little later than the date of the signing of the contract. And this letter, which says that you can start work now or issue the work order from such and such date, is very important, because the period for construction as mentioned in the contract will be counted from that day onwards. Sometimes the contractors also need to be given some mobilization advance. Some advance payment also at times has to be made to the contractor. So taking all this into consideration, these two dates are very important and they become a very important part of the contract: date of commencement and date of completion. Next, there is the whole question of how payments are made, or how do you ensure that the contractor sticks to his side of the bargain. And for this, there is, in the tendering process, already 1% of the cost of the construction is taken as earnest money. Okay. Now what you do is you create something called as a security deposit. And this security deposit is usually 2% of the cost of the work. Now, theoretically, you should return the earnest money taken from the contractor to him and then ask him to pay 2% of the cost as security deposit. But many times we don't do that. We simply convert the earnest money into part security deposit, and the remaining 1% you ask the contractor to pay. So 2% are taken as the security deposit. Now, after this, there is something which is called as retention fund. Now, what is retention fund? When the contractor is paid for the work that he does from time to time, there is a certain percentage of that payment which is deducted and retained with the owner. Okay, and therefore it is called retention fund. Usually, the total retention fund is limited to 5% of the cost of the work, or we call it limit of retention fund is 5% of the cost. Now, this 5% are made up with the first 2% which are already collected as security deposit, and the remaining 3% have to be gradually deducted from the contractor's bills. Okay. Now, do you deduct 3% every time you pay to the contractor? No. You actually deduct 5% every time you pay to the contractor. When the architect issues a certificate of interim payment, he says that this is, in my opinion, the value of work as of now on site, and the contractor may be paid so much money. And then in that certificate itself, he mentions that 5% out of this will be deducted, and that will become part of the retention fund. Now imagine that if the work is worth 1 crore, and let's say there are 10 times the payment is to be made. So every time you're going to make a payment of approximately 10 lakhs to the contractor. The total retention fund is 5% of 1 crore. So that is 5 lakhs, out of which you already have collected 2 lakhs as security deposit. The remaining 3 lakhs you will have to keep on deducting from contractor's bill at 5% of every bill. So the first payment which is made is for 10 lakhs, out of which you will deduct 5%, that is 50,000, add it to the retention fund. Next payment, another 5% or another 50,000. And like that, by the time you make payment of about 60% of the cost, that is 60 lakhs, you will have deducted at 5% a total amount of 3 lakhs. And remember, you had the earlier 2 lakhs. So 3 lakhs plus the earlier 2 lakhs together form 5 lakhs. And the limit of the retention fund is reached. After that, you do not make any deductions. Or in simple words, by the time the contractor completes about 60% of the work, your limit of retention fund is reached, and you already have about 5% of the total cost with you. Okay. But why do we have to pay the contractors from time to time? That's the next question. Because the contractor will not invest his money for the entire construction. That is not expected. So what he would do is, as soon as he completes about 10% of the work, which is mentioned in the contract, then he will submit a bill, an interim bill as it is called, to the architect. The architect will go and check, form his opinion as to what is the value of work on site as of that date, and make an educated sort of guess as to how much the contractor can be paid. So usually what we do is we maintain measurements because of the clerk of works who's sitting there, and we check what is the work which has been completed. And if at all we are going to err, we are going to err on the lower side. That means if the contractor submits a bill for 15 lakhs, and if at all you are going to make a mistake, don't give him an interim certificate for 16 lakhs, but give him for 14 lakhs, little less than what is the stage of construction on site. What about unfixed material? Now, sometimes the unfixed material on site at times is also added. The cost is also added to the bill, but in most cases, architects usually discourage this practice. because there have been instances where contractors will submit a bill and later on lift the material and take it away again. So in order to, especially this can happen with steel. Okay, so usually you don't take unfixed material on site, or material which is not been used as yet in construction on site, as part of the bill. So the architect will certify how much payment can be made. Now, when this kind of certificate is given, there is another added responsibility put on the architect, and that is there are certain deductions which are statutory. For instance, TDX, or tax deducted at source, which, and prepare the certificate. You have to say this is the gross cost or the gross amount that can be paid to the contractor, out of which deduct 5% for retention. Another 2% have to be deducted as TDS, and it has to be paid. The owner has to not only deduct but pay that amount into the treasury and give the contractor the bill that this is the tax that I have paid on your behalf, after deducting it from the payment that was to be made to you. So these are all responsibilities of the architect and the owner. And this is the interim certificate of payment that you have to do. Next, when do we do the final checking of this? There is a limit which is put. Okay, period for final measurement. That is the clause. Now, what does this mean? See, after the work is complete, the contractor will submit a bill to the architect. And the architect is duty bound to go and check every measurement, check the bill, and certify the final amount that is to be paid to the contractor. Okay, now it is quite likely that the architects and the owners may dilly-dally. They may postpone checking of the bills for whatever reasons, and that will not work well for the contractor. So there is a limit which is put. Usually this limit never is more than 3 months. Okay, for small jobs, it is in fact a month or so. So as soon as the contractor submits the bill, within that stipulated period for final measurement, the architect or his representative, owner or his representative, and the contractor's representative will all have to go and check the measurements on site. Then the architect will check the bill and certify what is the final amount or what is the final total cost of the project. And the owner will have to pay that amount to the contractor. There's also this whole question of honoring the certificate. Just as there's a limit put for measurements to be done within the stipulated period, there's also a stipulated time within which the owner has to make the payment to the contractor. If he doesn't make that payment, then there is another provision which is interest on delayed payment. For instance, if a payment is due and the owner doesn't pay the contractor, then for the delay in payment, he will have to bear the interest. Now, usually, how much is this interest? It is a penal provision. So it's a provision which is a provision for punishing the owner for not making payment on time. And therefore, this interest rate is not equal to the bank interest rate, but a much higher interest rate. If let's say the bank lending interest rate today is, let's say, 15%, then the interest for delayed payment is not 15, but it could be 20, 21, like that. So that the owner is not going to use this loophole and not pay the contractor, because he will say, in any case I have to pay interest to bank, I will pay the interest to the contractor. So the owner should not be allowed to take shelter of this provision of making payment of interest for delayed payment. So the interest rate is much higher, so that the owner has to pay, because otherwise he will be losing money. Now remember, you have the retention fund with you, that is 5% of the total cost. So there is another clause which talks about how much money has to be paid to the contractor out of the retention fund on the day the building is completed. So when the building is complete in all respect, the architect issues a certificate for virtual completion. Now, this is not to be confused with the completion certificate and occupancy certificate that people obtain from the municipal authorities. That is different. This is a certificate which the architect issues to the contractor, which says the building is complete in all respect. It's called certificate of virtual completion. Now, as soon as this is given, the owner also has to give an installment of half of the retention fund to the contractor. Remember, he has 5%. So out of that, 2.5% of the total cost is also refunded to the contractor. It is his money. It is given back to him. But the remaining 2.5% is retained even after the building is complete. For how long? So there is another clause which talks about defects liability period. Now, what is defects liability period? You all know that once the building is complete, it has to go through various changes of seasons. You know, there'll be the hot period and the cold period, and there'll be rains. And what all this does is that there may be some defects in the constructions which are not visible to the naked eye as soon as the construction is complete. And these defects will come out, they will become visible to you as time progresses, especially cracks in plaster, leakages. These are two very important kinds of defects which always become evident only when the building is subjected to alternate changes of seasons. Okay, so usually we put this period for defects liability as defects liability period around 1 year or one rainy season, whichever is more. Now, why do we say one rainy season, whichever is more? Because in any every year you will get rain at least once. That is the assumption. But there are places where it doesn't rain every year. Sometimes it rains once in 2 years. Sometimes the rains get delayed. Okay. So instead of saying 1 year, we always say 1 year or one rainy season, whichever is more. And during this period, we will allow defects to become apparent or visible. After the expiry of the defects liability period, there is a joint inspection, and the architect will write down what are the defects that the contractor has to make good at his own cost. Because if there is a defect in the building, it will have to be repaired by the contractor, and he will not be paid separately for that. So the contractor has to complete all the defects have to be rectified, and then when the architect says that okay, issues the certificate that defects have been rectified or repaired, then the remaining 2.5% that is retained is paid to the contractor. Now imagine a situation where the contractor doesn't come to repair. He just doesn't come. Then what does the owner do? So you have to employ another agency and get the defects rectified. And as soon as that is done, you pay the new contractor or a new agency out of the 2.5% that is retained with you. And then if there is still some more money remaining, then you give it back to the original contractor. So this is the purpose for which the retention money is kept back till the end of the defects liability period. Okay. Now let's look at what happens if the building construction gets delayed. Because just as for delayed payment, the owner has to pay interest. What happens? What is the penalty levied against the contractor for not completing work on time? So this is called as liquidated, and these are in terms of a certain sum per day. Okay, which means if the contractor delays, let's say, completion of the building by 10 days, And then if you have said that the liquidated damages are 10,000 rupees a day, then 10,000 into 10 is 1 lakh. So 1 lakh is deducted from the final payment that is to be made to the contractor. All right. Now, how do you calculate what should be liquidated damages? Is it equal to the interest of investment? Yes, but not only interest on cost of construction, but also cost of land. Because remember, the owner has already purchased the land. So you calculate, you find out what is the cost of land and what is the cost of construction, and then going at the market rate, bank interest rate, you calculate what is the per day interest. Okay. Does it end here? No. Because remember, if the building was ready, the owner would have been able to use the building. Suppose it's a hotel. Then the day the building is complete, the owner would start getting money out of his hotel. Or if it is a rental apartment, I mean, apartments to be given on the rental basis, the owner will start getting rent. If it's a hospital, he will start making money from the hospital. So this apparent loss of revenue or profit that the owner might make if the building was completed on time, that component also has to be added to the liquidated damages amount. So usually we calculate it at about 2.5% of the cost. Okay, cost of land and construction taken together. 2.5% per month. And then divided by 30 to get a per day figure for liquidated damages. Now, just as you have liquidated damages, sometimes we also include a bonus clause. So what is this bonus clause? If the contractor completes the work before time, then you have to pay him per day certain bonus in addition to his pay. Is the bonus amount same as liquidated damages? No, it is not the same. It is usually half of what is the liquidated damages, because if the contractor is going to complete the work earlier and the owner is going to benefit, then he will share the benefit with the contractor. So 50-50. Okay. So bonus figure is usually half of that for the liquidated damages. Now, let's say in spite of all this, there are disputes. Disputes can always be there, right? And why would there be disputes? Because the owner and the contractor may not agree on implementation of certain clauses. Now, in such cases, the role of the architect becomes very important. We usually say in jurisprudence, it is called as quasi-judicial role. Quasi means as if. So you have to be as if like a judge, and then that means you cannot be partial. Okay. So this is the quasi-judicial role that the architect has to play in case of a dispute between contractor and owner. But in spite of that, if they are not satisfied, then there is always the arbitration and conciliation process, for which there is an act, and you can always follow that process. Okay. And disputes can be sorted out. But why would there be disputes? Very simply, it usually happens, especially when there is extra work done or extra items added. While the estimation is made, there are unforeseen circumstances for which you have not provided, or you have not taken the rates from the contractor for that. So there is also something called as prime cost and provisional sum. Now, what is prime cost? Just as I told you, for all those unforeseen circumstances, the contractor also quotes certain rates for materials and labor rates, but they are not directly applicable in this work. Okay. And what is provisional sum? You make a provision for a certain sum in the contract, which can be used for all these unforeseen circumstances. So if suddenly some additional work needs to be done, the rates for those will be calculated based on the prime cost items, for which the contractor has already submitted a quote. Okay. Now, we were talking about liquidated damages. It is also possible sometimes that the time limit needs to be extended for the contractor. Now, when can that happen? That can only be given by the architect for a situation which is called a force majeure, or something that is beyond the control of either the contractor, the owner, or the architect. Suppose there is a natural calamity, there's a fire, earthquake, there is COVID, so you can't continue construction because of COVID, because you don't get labor. So things like this, which are outside the scope of or beyond the control of anyone. For these kinds of circumstances, the architect can issue an extension of time limit. Okay. And here the architect's decision is final. Neither the owner nor the contractor can have any kind of say in this. It is the architect who has to make a judgment as to how many days of extension has to be given to the contractor. And then the liquidated damages for those days will not be charged. So this is more or less the sum and substance of everything that I wanted to say today.